One of the stranger features of previous Persona games that P5 omits is the presence of school clubs and by extension their associated social links. Clubs are a great way for those with a shared passion to meet and network, or even just broaden one's horizons, and it's one of the things that I'd like to see return in P6. Especially given how organically this works within Persona's calendar and social link mechanics. As a socially awkward, autistic kid growing up, I get a certain vicarious catharsis from being able to experience clubs that I had been unable or unwilling to give a shot at in real life. Particularly when role-playing as a Japanese teen that moonlights as a Shonen Jump protagonist, whose association to this club is itself further rewarded thanks to associated benefits and a quaint slice-of-life narrative that can thematically relate back to the themes of the game. All this has gotten me thinking on what new school clubs could be featured upon this upcoming release, and what they could offer to spice up a playthrough or connect to the themes and aesthetic of a green Persona game. Thus, this video came to be. These are 6 potential clubs for Persona 6. As a quick ground rule, the school clubs that have already appeared in the series, those being on screen now, aren't going to be occupying a spot on this list. Not necessarily to disqualify them from ever returning, but rather to highlight what could be and speculate on what hasn't happened yet. Furthermore, this list is going to be structured slightly differently than is typical because of its nature. I am going to be going over one category for what a club can be, with 2 entries within said category. My reasoning for this is to be less repetitive with regards to each club's category, since many of my desired clubs of a certain category simply overlap with each other, and so I feel that this will be a more organic way to explore and explain the types of clubs I would like to see represented and why. The first category of clubs that I'd like to talk about are going to be sports clubs, for which my picks will be badminton and rock climbing. Rock climbing is a sport that would very much demand being out in nature, and as P6 is likely going to be green, having at least a few instances where the group goes out into the wild would tie into the color's association with the natural world quite nicely and complement the potential rural setting. While it wouldn't be out of the question for the school to have an artificial rock climbing wall for practice, having an actual club would mean that at least a few of the events could occur over the weekend as the teams scale a natural cliff in or adjacent to the wilderness. The context of the weather needing to be good could also factor into having an obvious time limit of accomplishing this social link before it becomes winter, which should be taken into account and if implemented right can even add a sense of tension to trying to complete this one on time. As for why I'd like to recommend the somewhat atypical sport of badminton, I actually have a few different reasons for this sport specifically. The thing that first sparked my desire to see a badminton club in Persona is because I have watched and enjoyed the anime Hanebado, and because I really liked that show, which works out well for this list, granting me an excuse to show a clip from that show here and now. That said, my reasoning for this in combination with rock climbing is that one can be an official school team, while the other more so an informal one, meaning that unlike previous sports team options, both are feasible to be done within the school year without sacrificing the other, adding a bit of spice to P6 without the need for a subsequent playthrough. While the case could be made that an outdoor sport practiced in greener fields like lacrosse would better suit the green color and environmentalism of P6, rather than a sport that is typically done on a flat prepared field or in a gymnasium, the fact that badminton would occur in these areas would allow the link to continue to progress without the weather interfering like it obviously would for rock climbing. Something which can make the task of trying to complete all social links in one go a bit more feasible, and be a good contrast to the obvious time limit of needing to complete the rock climbing link before the frost sets in. The brown gymnasium could also offer a change in scenery from the heavy use of greens in stylized screens and the environment, offering a bit of color variety and diversity in the setting. Now, one thing to take note of with regards to clubs is of course the benefits that they would invite as we progress the corresponding social link. While this was a very good idea in theory, How it was implemented in Persona 5 was very clunky and resulted in a difficulty that progressively grew easier as the game progressed. And there were many that were outright poorly thought out in conception, such as Oya's reduction of palace security largely being pointless. As such, not only am I going to recommend the benefits, but also how to balance them in this section. My recommendation for the Rock Climbing Club would be for it to enable access to previously restricted areas in dungeons to explore and find will seeds, rare items, and unique boss battles with. Think of the new areas accessed with Joker's grappling hook in P5R, but unlocked via a social link later into the journey to encourage revisiting the older places and discovering new secrets, or even sought out specifically to try and progress with one of the later dungeons, the way that specific links needed some commitment to unlock and gain the benefits of in P5. As for badminton, as the sport is about swinging a racket to hit a difficult to predict target, I'd say that the benefits should be linked to reducing the possibility of misses unless debuffed, increasing technical damage, and the chance to inflict critical hits more often, perhaps even opening up the possibility to have magic attacks be critical as well. However, what I'd like for the final two benefits is to inflict a small amount of free damage at the start of battle if you take the enemy by surprise, and for the protagonist's regular physical attack to pierce resist physical, not null, absorb, or reflect phys, just resist phys, and for this to only work with the default physical attack, not persona physical skills. A limitation done to keep things balanced without completely and utterly making physical skills OP one-hit KO moves after this link's been completed. And now for the art clubs. Clubs of self-expression that encourage both a mastery of tried and tested skill sets and the self-expression that comes from practicing the discipline. Typically, the art clubs of the past, that is in Persona 3 and 4, fall into one of two categories, either being a music-oriented club or a visual arts-oriented club, and thus for this section I will be choosing one from each category to keep consistency with this trend. For music, I'm going to say a light music club, and for the visual arts, I'm going to say a clay sculpting club. The light music club, contrary to the name, doesn't apply to the British genre of music of the same name, but rather something closer to pop, though in theory it could apply to any genre of music so long as the members were all unified in playing said genre. There are no shortage of genres that I personally prefer over pop myself, but what I'd actually like the genre of music played to be is the one most dominated by in the soundtrack, be it a return to jazz or hip-hop, or the introduction of a more atypical genre choice like heavy metal or classical, the atypical tastes of which could imply a sort of isolation at preferring what is not standard and found appealing by peers, but with a deep passion and appreciation to the discipline and the genre in question. As we are assuming that P6's theme will be rooted in health and nature, the soundtrack, and thus the music club associated with it, for the above reasons should reflect this ideally. And so I'd like to say that the music styling should be something naturalistic. So imagine something like Fairy Tale's strong Celtic edge, or Inuyasha's classical Japanese instrumentation. As for clay sculpting, I have 3 reasons for why I'd like to see this club specifically. Number 1 is that I was actually in a sculpting club back in middle school. The second is due to my own affinity to videos about great sculptors made by talented artists, either for decoration or for practical uses in foundations and terrariums. And finally, and probably the most obvious to those who have been paying attention to this list, is that as a naturally occurring substance from the earth, clay, and by association the art made from it, are an organic fit for the hypothetical P6. As for the benefits, for the light music club, I'd say that this club would probably be the best for helping in negotiations, much like No Good Tora's social link from P5. Except rather than impassioned and heartfelt speeches and oratorical skills, I'd go with playing certain songs as recorded by the light music club, could affect a demon's attitude or the result of a negotiation. For example, play a song that a shadow likes and the demon could end up instantly joining the player as a persona, or reward them with a rare item, or if the shadow hates the song, results in them fleeing from battle, sometimes with them tossing an item to distract the player, or get them to stop the music, or enrage them beyond reason and restart the battle without hope for a new negotiation. However, I could also see the music used in a more flexible manner to also affect how the player navigates the dungeons, such as increasing palace security in return for attracting roaming shadows to a given area so as to get past them into a restricted area or something to that extent. Finally, I'd like for the max social link rank reward to be the option for the player to play a song that would allow for a free mind charge and power charge to each party member once per battle. As for the sculpting club's benefits, this is a bit trickier as this discipline doesn't really translate all that much outside of its niche in decoration, so the benefits might need to be outside of it, and the link could instead be with a character who's not as defined by their social interaction in this environment, such as a party member or the navigator. While this means that a good portion of the link's benefits would be the ones shared with other party members, such as taking lethal blows for the protagonist, there are still a few clay-oriented benefits that I could potentially see being done with this club. One obvious one would be in decorations. I personally found the ways to unlock and get decorations for my room in P5 to be a bit too obtuse in most cases, when I really had the itch to decorate and customize my living space. Following this logic, one benefit that I'd like to see be implemented with this sort of club would be spending time to mold clay sculptures, specifically okimono and netsuke, miniature clay statues used for decoration and fashion respectively, which in the context of the game would be in the likeness of potential personas and shadows. An associated benefit of using these likenesses could be to try and get conversations with shadows to go smoother by showing the okimono or wearing the netsuke as equipment, immediately improving the tone of a conversation should the shadow share the same arcana with the okimono, or immediately joining the protagonist without hassle if they are the very netsuke that the protagonist is wearing. The final category is going to be simply other clubs. Clubs that are a possibility but don't fall into the category of either being a sports or art club, the categories present in previous games. Clubs in Japan can basically be anything. I've seen enough anime to know this, from the practical, such as what has already been covered, to the unconventional in a deep appreciation for the chupacabra and those run by teenage melodrama like popular student fan clubs, which don't seem to exist in real life, but are entirely possible within the realm of the anime-centric persona. And while I can't think of a good reason for the protagonist to join a fan club like that, it would still be pretty funny to see it included in the game nonetheless. Heck, if we broaden our definition of what a club could be in this context, then we could also include student-run committees, since in terms of potential gameplay and narrative, the two would function the same way as evidenced by the student council in Persona 3. While the health committee would be a very good fit for this game, given Green's association with health, as the protagonist was already a temporary member filling in for Naoki in Persona 4, however tempting I found it to include on this list is disqualified. Instead, the two clubs for this final section will be the Gardening Club and a Science Club. Gardening was a family bonding event in Persona 4 Golden that also allowed for access to special fruits and vegetables that work as one-time use items in-game, something that was also present via Haru's confidant in P5, despite not technically joining the club proper. So having that return in P6 tied to a club is a logical next step for the series to make, given that it's already an existing mechanic within the series. There really isn't much more for me to say about gardening beyond the additionally obvious in that it is an organic fit with the color green and the corresponding themes, and with the potential to add some color variety into the palette. To the point that it is frankly self-explanatory on why a club like this would work, and it's honestly surprising that this wasn't a club option in Persona 5 given the aforementioned. To the point that I wouldn't be surprised if this was the initial intention with this link before being dropped, either through the blundering of plot beats, or the context of perhaps the protagonist not being welcome to join a club because of his criminal record, though that is entering into the realm of headcanon. Much like gardening, the Science Club is another natural next step for Persona to tackle as a club. While it has never been an option, one science club was present in Yasogami High, planting that seed as a possibility in future games. And whether or not the rumor of P6 being set in Inaba is true or not, I'd personally like to see this club come to fruition. As for what type of science club the science club would be, I'm going to say that rather than a stereotypical general science club, I'd like for the science club option to be a club more centered on a specific branch of science, like local zoology, botanology, ecology, or psychology to name a few examples. Each of these options carry their own unique possibilities in what benefits open up, and what social link stories can be told, and how each club could relate back to the main theme or identity of Persona 6. A psychology club, for instance, could be used to explain and explore the mechanics of cognition, personas, and shadows to the player near the beginning of the game, and also be used to welcome the topic of mental health into the equation. Furthermore, given the color green, it can be inferred that balance is going to play some role in P6, much like how Law and Chaos did with P3 and 5 respectively, be it a core component relating back to the theme, or an aesthetic callback to mainline SMT. And a key part of mental health is finding a personal balance between life's various factors, like work, relationships, stress management, fun, and so forth, and so perhaps the social link story could even be centered on the player teaching this to a fellow student, given that this is a part of Persona's gameplay loop. Knowing when to dungeon crawl and knowing when to live life as a regular student. SMT as a series is in desperate need for a game that can actually portray the alignment of neutrality as an actual coherent idea, rather than the best of both worlds or an innate good option, even when it contradicts the context of the game's story, and a very easy and organic fix would be to emphasize the personal balance of neutrality in much the same way that personal freedom was a focal point in Persona 5. And this can best be represented in a psychology club in my opinion, and much like badminton, its aesthetic potential to happen both indoors and outside can offer a break in excessive green and give variety to the rural setting, while not straying away too far from it, as green is a naturally calming and soothing color. This of course now brings us to the associated benefits for the clubs and their social links. Obviously, I would say that the benefits for the gardening club would be gaining more room for cultivating and decreasing the time spent on them as the link progressed, along with perhaps opening up access for better seeds after each rank up, going from a single box that could grow maybe a handful of tiny soul tomatoes to being able to grow a dozen of bead melons, moonlight carrots, and tetracorns all at once and needing less time to do so. Meanwhile, the psychology club would be the simple but underrated benefit of adding more time or somehow opening up more windows of time to quickly work on infiltration tools or P6's equivalent, and to finish up books much like the Temperance social link of P5. Speaking of which, and given the emphasis on balance, I'd say that the Temperance would probably be the arcana for the psychology club's associated social link. Obviously, however, this wouldn't be the only one. And so another benefit associated with the first that I'd like to recommend would be reading more in less time due to improved mental health, which could play a role in being able to finish all of the books easily and efficiently, perhaps even the difference between being able to finish them at all. Mental health could have a lot of practical applications in the dungeon as well as outside, and I think that the link's benefits associated with both would play back into the above mentioned double life dynamic. These in-dungeon benefits could include a better resistance to ailments such as despair and anger, but not to something like poison, perhaps scaling this resistance to how far along in the link one is and gaining total immunity regardless of equipped persona at max level. And another benefit could be, once maxed or near maxed, is for the possibility to immediately down all remaining enemies after downing one if you had taken the enemy by surprise at the start of the battle, and did the downing within your first turn before everyone has gone. Maybe even when this occurs, you can be further rewarded with some bonus money, EXP, or rarer items when the battle concludes, or during negotiations. And that's the video. Not much to add. I'm more or less happy with how this video turned out, and would once again like to apologize for the delay. On screen right now will be my previous list of 6, the 6 potential mascots for Persona 6 video, which I highly recommend, and would just like to remind people, or tell them if they were not aware, that I am hosting a poll in my community tab where you can vote on what my next Persona 6 list of 6 video will be, and that should be either the February or March list of 6, assuming that everything goes as planned and I am not delayed again. I'm going to try and get at least one more video out for January, and so I will see you then. Happy New Year, everybody.